It's my privilege to serve as the president of this year's China Roundtable. Today's program is designed to highlight Chinese role in the globalization era and the increasing importance of the U.S.-China relationship. Given China's role as a global economic power, it is even more important than ever for students worldwide to learn about China's language and culture. We're fortunate enough today to have two excellent speakers who will address China's economic influence and impact on the lives of Americans. And now, I'm pleased to introduce our headmaster, Jim Neal. I'd like to invite Mr. Neal to offer a welcome greeting. Thank you.
Good afternoon. It's a privilege to welcome all of you to this year's China Roundtable of Washington here at Landon. It's a privilege to welcome all of you to Landon, and it's a privilege to welcome some of you to the United States, some for the first time. It's no secret that China and the United States represent two of the most influential geopolitical, cultural, and economic forces in the world today. It occurs to me, therefore, that understanding between and of the two nations by one another and connecting people from both countries with one another in this kind of setting where we sit and share a meal and where we discuss issues of importance to both nations is not only important, I would contend it's imperative. It's imperative not only to ensuring greater understanding of and respect for each other, it's also imperative to ensuring a stable world order in the short and long term, and it's imperative to developing and exploiting opportunities for cross-cultural partnerships and collaborations that will help better the globe overall. So I express my thanks to you, Aaron. I express my thanks to our speakers who are here today and to our performers who will be sharing their insights and their gifts. And a special thanks to Zhao Heng for organizing, again, this important gathering. Welcome again, and I hope you enjoy the gathering. Thank you.
I'm pleased to introduce the Roundtable's academic advisor, Ms. Yang. She is the upper school's Chinese teacher and director of the Chinese Scholastic Exchange Program at Landon. In 1996, Ms. Yang joined the Landon School, establishing one of the first Mandarin Chinese programs in the Washington, D.C. area. I've had the pleasure of being a student of Ms. Yang for my entire Landon career. At this point, I'd like to invite Ms. Yang to offer some remarks.
Thank you, Aaron. 谢谢你. Welcome, and thank you all for coming to our 2016 China Roundtable Washington. The Roundtable, founded in 2001, is an educational organization and is open to all who share a fascination with China. Students, parents, teachers, administrators, and the Washington community as a whole. The goal is to promote U.S.-China relations and enhance cross-cultural understanding between people in the two nations. I'm very grateful to many people for making this event happen. I want to thank our headmaster, Mr. Jim Neal, for his enthusiastic support of the program. And thanks also go to Mr. Earl Jackson, Landon Performing Arts Department Chair, and he's also the chairman of the Beijing International Wing Festival. He's a faithful supporter of the Chinese program at Landon. Certainly, thanks go to my students, President Aaron Broner and Vice President Syed Al-E Ali, for their leadership in this year's China Roundtable. Without further ado, here's Al to introduce our first speaker. Thank you.
Hello. I'm pleased to introduce Dr. Jianping Zhou. She is a senior economist at the International Monetary Fund's Monetary and Capital Markets Department, responsible for the IMF's financial sector policy advice for its member countries. Previously, Dr. Zhou spent 10 years with the IMF's European and Asian departments, covering the Euro area and the emerging Asian economies, including China and Korea. Her recent policy research focused on the financial integration in Europe and Asia. She is co-editor and co-author of the 2014 IMF book, From Fragmentation to Financial Integration in Europe, and contributor to the 2015 IMF book, The Future of Asian Finance, in addition to many published papers on the policies for preventing government bailout of large banks and crisis management. Dr. Zhou regularly gives lectures in Europe and Asia to central bankers and policymakers from these regions on financial sector policies. She holds a bachelor's degree in mathematics from Zhejiang University in China and a master's and PhD degrees in economics from Georgetown University. Please help me welcome Dr. Jianping Zhou.
Thank you, Said, for the kind introduction. And I also want to thank Mr. O'Neill for the very warm welcome, and also Aaron for the fabulous introduction. And of course, I want to thank Ms. Young for the kind invitation. And as a mom from Houghton Arms School, I'm also happy to see some familiar faces here. Thank you for being here. When I accepted the invitation, and actually I also realized that it's a not easy task for two reasons. One is that to give a discussion of what happened in China over the last 35 years and its increasingly important role in the global economy within 10 or 15 minutes is a daunting task. And secondly is that I'm used to talk to policymakers in those long jargon, economic jargons, and now I have to speak to students in a very plain English language, explain to them about policies. I have to say that it is a challenge, and my daughter had reminded me constantly that please don't give a very boring presentation. So I will try my best. And I will do so actually by showing you just some slides and some numbers. Now, some of the numbers may not be really that precise, so I just want to show the trend of what happened in China, starting in 1979, when China opened up its economy. Before that, as many of you know, that China was an isolated economy, and its economy was under central planned, it was a central planned economy, it's not so market-oriented. But then in 1979, when then President Deng Xiaoping introduced the economic reforms, and over the last 35 years, so much had happened. I can give you one story. I recently went to see the Star Wars movie, and which reminded me fondly of my first experience with American movie. That was about 1980. And we were watching the movie, the Star Wars, the first episode, in the cafeteria, where there was about like 100 students. I was a junior high school student at that time. And there was only one TV showing in the cafeteria. There was about 100 kids glued to the TV trying to see what's happening. And 35 years later, now you see that China not only export TVs, because it's difficult to find TV that is not made in China, but also export many other things, including iPhones, iPads. I don't need to go on the list. So this is just kind of an anecdote story. And now let me go to some numbers, since I'm an economist, so I have to talk based on numbers. But before I went to these numbers, I'm required to say that whatever my presentation is about really does not reflect the view of the International Monetary Fund or of its executive director board. So all the view I express here is my own, and I'm solely responsible for what I say. So let's look at some numbers. So this chart shows you about Chinese economy. What China produces is called the GDP. For those of you who are not students of economics, GDP means gross domestic product. Basically, it is kind of the measure of the size of Chinese economy, what China produces. And so that shows you that in 1779, China at that time produced less than 3% of what the whole world produced at that time. And 35 years later, now China produces, so it's a dark blue bar, you look at dark blue bar, China now produces closer to 15% of the world gross domestic output. So about close to 15% of output in the world is now produced in China. Of course, if you look at the US, you will see that US is still more important, right? The US produces closer to 25%. But China is getting closer. Now let's look at the second slide. Second slide basically showing that the US economy is growing pretty fast as well. It's just China is growing a little bit faster, mainly because China starts from a much lower base. So it's nothing to say that US economy is doing worse than China. It's just showing that in relative terms that China is growing so much faster. So if you look at what China produced in 1979, and China produces about, in absolute dollar term, less than $1 trillion in output. And by 2014, that number is closer to more than 10 trillion. And again, you will see that US is still much more important. Economy is still much bigger than China. Now, what has driven the Chinese growth over the last 35 years? Last 35, China is growing almost like double digit. So that is unprecedented in the global economy. And it's mainly rely heavily on exports. And if you look at in 1979, China export, that means what Chinese produces and sells to the rest of the world, is less than 10 billion US dollars. But right now, it's like more than 2 trillion. And the share of the world exports, that how much share China has is increased from less than 2% to now, this number is incorrect, not 74%, it should be like close to 20%, to 20 or 25%. So it's still a very big number. That means whatever is being exported to the world, China has about a quarter is from China. So that just shows that the increasing Chinese influence in world trade. But this being said, if you look at China, China is still a relatively poor country. China is much richer now than it was before. But in terms of per capita output, what Chinese have, or per capita income, Chinese level is only about 15% of the US economy. So the question is that how quickly can China catch up? Obviously, China will catch up, it's just the speed. And that will depend on a whole range of factors, mainly on economic policies. So now let's talk about how important China is now in terms of, in the context of global economy. People used to say that when US economy sneezes, the world catch a cold. But now recently we see that actually when China sneezed, the rest of the world caught a bit of a cold as well. And one example is the stock market. If any of you or your parents are investing in the stock market, you will know that the beginning of the year, in this January, Chinese stock market basically dived down very rapidly. And there is a huge decline in Chinese stock market, and which sends a ripple effect through the global financial markets. Stocks in Japan, stocks in Europe, stocks in the US all fell because of that. Now, so why is that? And I think that's because there are a few factors. One is that China, in addition to just exports to the rest of the world, the Chinese financial market has become also increasingly integrated with the regional, with the regions, like Asian region, and also global financial markets. Not to mention that Chinese actually holds lots of U.S. Treasury bills, so Chinese actually indirect finances U.S. deficit in that sense. And many top international banks are actually Chinese banks. So Chinese banks become quite important in the global sense. And not to mention that the Chinese banks are incredibly important in Asia region, where they are pretty big and they are systemic, meaning that what happened to them could affect the economy of those countries where the banks are doing business. And then most recently, the Chinese currency has joined the IMF's SDR. Now this is a jargon, and I have to explain what is SDR. So SDR is called a special drawing right. It is not a currency, but it is kind of like international currency, except that you cannot use SDR to buy candies from shops. It is a kind of currency that is a currency unit that IMF uses, or government countries use it to settle their accounts within the IMF. But anyone knows what IMF does? Yeah. What does IMF do? Okay, so maybe just a few words about what IMF do. IMF is an organization of 188 countries. It was created in 1949. And the objective, the job of the institution is to promote global monetary cooperation and secure global financial stability, and also to facilitate international trade, promote growth, reduce poverty around the world. So that's what we do. So when a country, so the IMF does not give money to private sectors, do not give loans, but we do give loans to governments when the government is in need of money. And that is counted in terms of SDR, and they call it special drawing rights. And it's used to be dominated, it's a basket of 4 currencies. It's US dollar, euro, then it's yen and sterling, UK sterling. Now, starting from this October, the Chinese RMB will be part of the basket as well. Now, why it is important for China to join this SDR, right? It means that, first, it's a prestige, right? China has become part of important international monetary system. And secondly, that China joining the SDR means that they will be probably under pressure to open up its economy more, to introduce more flexibility. So this is why it is very important. And in terms of effect on even the value of dollar or value of yen in the long term, that could have some impact as well. So that's why it was a very important event for people in the policy-making setting. Now, this being said, China also matters in other ways. First, the tourism. The Chinese tourism has become a very important fact in Europe, in many other countries, in the US as well. And so when Chinese economy is slowing down, that will affect the economy in other countries through tourism. And then there's China, it's the biggest commodity demand in the world. So when Chinese economy slow down recently, and that affects countries that export oil, so the oil price is falling. It affects countries that export other commodities, raw materials. So those countries, mainly in the African countries, and that affects them as well. So commodity prices are falling as well. And then on top of that, China has become also a large market for exports from other countries, particularly from the US. US exports cars, exports lots of things to China. And most lastly, Chinese has started invest abroad a lot too. So before, it's lots of US companies, European companies invest in China, but now Chinese companies investing a lot abroad as well. And when Chinese economy slows down, that affects many countries that is depending on Chinese investment, particularly those in African countries and Middle Eastern countries. So going forward, China faces lots of challenges. The economy is slowing down right now, and China faces some structural problems as well. So one is that the Chinese population is aging. Now, this is very unusual for a country with income level like China. But this kind of aging population, you would expect to see in Germany, in Japan, but not in China. But why that happened, as many of you know that, because this kind of result of this one-child policy that was imposed by the government in the 80s. And now we see the consequences, that we are having an aging population, and we are not even a very rich country yet. And then the second thing is that can China really always depend on export to develop its economy? Looks like there are going to be a limit as well, and China would need to, develop its domestic demand further, and that's called, you want to change the growth model from export-led to more like domestic demand-led. You want to be able to selling more goods to your own people. But in order to do that, the Chinese people will have to save less, but Chinese people save a lot relative to what they make. So why they save so much? Part is tradition, but part is because in China, unlike here, we don't have a social security system, and the pension system is only for the government sectors, not for private sectors, very incomplete. So people obviously want to save more. And to change that, you would have to open up a financial system. You need to develop a financial insurance industry, and you need to, it is happening, but more need to be done. And also, the economy, we still have a very big state-owned sector. Lots of enterprises are state-owned, they're inefficient. So we need to have more Alibaba. Basically, you need to have private sector play more roles. And this transition has to be managed very carefully because it's a country of 1.2 billion people. If you don't manage carefully, things could go wrong. So you need to change, but it has to be managed carefully. And it's really going to be a challenge for the Chinese policymakers. So this kind of ends my presentation here. And as I said, it is very difficult to cover all within about 10, 15 minutes about what happened in China. But before I finish, I want to also share with you something which has nothing to do with economy, but more to do with learning Chinese, why it will help from my personal experience. So I have a colleague who is from India, a very dear friend, and who was sent by the IMF to China, to Beijing, as its representative, called a resident representative. And he studied Chinese when he was in IMF. And when he went there, when his first meeting with ministers, he opened his speech in Chinese. And he said, he wrote it, he went through it with his teachers, he repeated, he practiced, and then he said it at that opening remarks. And immediately there was a huge applause, and it was served very much like icebreaker and relationship building. People turned very warm to him, so it was very helpful in terms of relationship building. So it's like a language, serves as like bridge builder. And my second example is in IMF, assignment on China is considered as very important assignment. And assignments have been given to, again, another colleague of mine. He is American, he studied Chinese in the high school, and he is at the management level. And normally, assignment about China cannot give to Chinese nationality. So even though you have many Chinese in the IMF who can speak language, but it wouldn't be possible for them to go to China. And he got the job simply because he speaks the language. So it opens lots of opportunities for people in IMF. And lastly, part of my job is also review and interview candidates for the IMF so-called Young Economist Program. And I can tell you that the CVs we receive are always very impressive. They're all those graduate students from very good universities. And sometimes, your language ability is kind of what sets you up away from other candidates. So all I can say is that bon courage, that's French. Study hard, and within Chinese we say 好好学习，天天向上, which means study hard, improve and improve. And thank you very much again for your attention. Thank you.
I would like to introduce Anne Hanakowitz. Her journey began in 2001 as she participated in Landon's in China program. This is where she had her first genuine Chinese experience. She went on to host Chinese exchange students through Landon's Chinese Scholastic Exchange Program. After graduating from Churchill High School, she went to the University of Pennsylvania. There, she majored in Chinese and later went on to earn a master's degree in Chinese literature and folklore from Ohio State University. Currently, Anne is the translation editor at China Digital Times. Now, I'd like to give a warm welcome to our guest speaker, Anne Hanakowitz.
大家好，我很高兴今天可以跟大家介绍一下我在中国的这个经验，主要学到周老师所说的。So good morning, good afternoon, everyone, and I think Ms. Zhou gave, Dr. Zhou gave wonderful advice. So I'm happy to introduce myself in both Chinese and English. Today, rather than talking about what I do with Chinese now, I wanted to talk a little bit about how I came to where I am and the role that being both an exchange student and a host sister has played in my life, not just when I studied the language, but also just as I've grown as a person, as I've grown up. And I'm going to be showing you lots of photos. And so this first photo is from 2001. When I went to China for the first time with Landon in China, and it's with my host sister and host mom in Beijing. So Meng Meng and I have continued our relationship. I see her every time I go to China now, and she's also visited me here in the US. And I feel like having that immediate contact with somebody where I could be treated like family in a place that's on the other side of the world has made a huge difference in how I've approached learning the Chinese language and learning about the country, because it wasn't just a place in a textbook, it was really a place that I had a personal connection to. So I'm going to, I don't know if I know how to use this. Let's find out. So I'm just going to show you a few photos first from my trip to Landon, with Landon in China. This is at the Xicheng Foreign Language School in Beijing. So Meng Meng is there on the right, and well, I guess that's my left. And on my right is another host sister, Mu Xinjie. So I lived with Meng Meng for a week, Mu Xinjie for a week, and a third host sister in Beijing for another week. Everyone was very excited to host a student from the US. So I ended up living with 3 different families in Beijing that summer. And when I first got to China, we had an exchange student stay with our family that previous Spring Festival, so around the Chinese New Year. And other than talking to her and asking her to teach me a few Chinese characters, I really knew nothing. I could not read any signs. I could say hello and thank you, and that was about it. So when I first went to China, I felt really lost and a bit homesick as well. But I did the travel portion of Landon in China for 2 weeks. And then I lived with host families, both when we first arrived in Beijing and then as I started studying the language. And just having Chinese around me and hearing it in everyday life and just seeing signs on the road, when I started finally learning the language, it made a huge impact having that background. So before I went to China, I really thought that when I went to college, I would like to study ancient Greek and Latin. In America, that's called a classics major. So I thought that I would study the classics, which I think would have been an exciting thing to study, but I'm really glad that I decided to actually study this living language because I had been so touched by having these friends and these sisters in China. And as I've grown with Mandarin and with learning more about China, I do really feel very happy that I can actually talk to the people who speak the language I've dedicated my life to. So after we were in Beijing, we also went to Chengdu and studied for about 2 weeks there before I finally finished Landon in China. And right in the very center is my host sister, Janet, and she and I are also still in touch. So, you know, a lot of you, this might be your first trip to the US, maybe you came here with your parents before on vacation, but maybe you're going to study in college in the US and then you're going to go back to China, or maybe you're going to come here for graduate school or to work for a few years. You never know where your life will take you. And I think having friends in places that feel very far away from home can make those places feel more like home. I definitely felt like that in Chengdu, and Janet has also come to visit me here in Washington, D.C., and it's just been such a pleasure to grow up together. She's actually finishing her PhD at Tulane University in New Orleans, and she does really interesting work studying the rural areas in Sichuan province after the earthquake of 2008. And so she's learned a lot from the disaster recovery after Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans. So things that might seem totally unrelated from what you're studying or from your life can actually have that big influence. And it's had that for me, and it's also had it for friends like Janet. Unfortunately, I could not find a good photo from my second trip to China that showed my host sisters. But I did want to show this. This is from summer of 2005. So after I came back from Landon in China, I kept studying Chinese in high school, and then I majored in Chinese in college. And then in the summer, I did an intensive language program at Beijing Normal University. It's a Sifan Daxue. And so I was with a lot of American students, but we were not allowed to speak any English. And for 8 weeks, so 2 months, everything was all Chinese all day. And that was really hard, but again, I credit having connections in China for helping me get through that difficult time and to feel not so out of place. So there, the friend who is to my left is Sylvia, and she was one of my friend Meng Meng's classmates. So I was able to spend time with her and her friends at the Chinese Communications University in Beijing before I started the program. And instead of just spending the whole summer, not that I didn't love hanging out with my American classmates as well, but being able to be on a Chinese college campus, I actually stayed there for 1 week. So I was just with Chinese friends for the first week before I even started Princeton and Beijing. And we got to go to karaoke, and I got to see one of the school plays. And I feel like that was one of the most meaningful things that I've ever done in China. I've really enjoyed visiting sites, seeing things like the Forbidden City and the Great Wall, but I'd much rather go to karaoke with my friends, to be honest. So I had it was a hard summer because Princeton and Beijing is a very hard program, but I got through it in part because of the friendships that I had. So Mu Xinjie was one of my host sisters, and this is us in 2007. I visited her when she was doing her graduate studies in Milan. And so I never thought that I would visit Italy. I never thought I would go to Milan, but I got to see Mu Xinjie over there. And then my host sister, Meng Meng, who is wearing the striped shirt and then the light blue, we've probably been the closest of all my host sisters. She has been living in Hong Kong, and I visited her there. I visited her in Beijing, and she's come and stayed with me for a few times in the US. So this is from 4 summers ago. She stayed in DC, and then we traveled up the East Coast together, and I introduced her to my friends from my old college. So this is a picture of Meng Meng and me and some good friends in Philadelphia. This is the one photo I could find of my host sister, Caroline, and I also got to see her mom in Chicago. And I have one more photo to share. Janet, the high school student who I showed you in the 3rd photo in this slide, this is her and her mom visiting me this fall in DC, and Janet's new daughter. So it has been wonderful, not just growing up, but also like seeing each other's lives change. And I'm happy if there's question and answer period to talk about both this experience and also what it's like being a translator, the kind of work that I do now. But the main thing I really wanted to let everyone know is just what a great opportunity is to have these exchanges, especially at a young age in high school. So I hope that everyone who's visiting from China right now is enjoying themselves. And if you are thinking about doing a summer program in China, you should definitely go for it. Thanks.
Hello?
So now we'll have a couple minutes for questions. We have like 5 minutes. So are there any questions?
Well, it's a very important question. I think, in general, people's lives are better than in '79. But the economic transformation comes at such a speed, and obviously, there's a dislocation. People feel dislocated, and there are always people getting better and others getting better less. And then we are now at a stage that Chinese economy actually is slowing down. And so some of the problems will emerge, right? Because one side effects of this rapid economic growth is this increasing income gaps. There are ones getting richer much faster, but then there are people being left behind. And now, without a social safety net, and those people's life are going to be impacted much more, unfortunately, much more negatively. So, environmentally, the Chinese have paid a huge price because the environment is pretty much ruined, and more needs to be done. And I think that's why the government now want to turn into so-called sustainable growth, that they don't want the growth to be dependent on just investment and investment. They want to have high-quality growth, which will involve much more sustainable speed, and as well as more environmental conscious. But as I said before, there are lots of challenges, because it is an economy of 1.2 billion people, and it's not so easy, but one has to try. So I hope, China would have to be integrated more with the rest of the world. And there are the opportunity. We have students coming from China here to learn about the life here, and then also the American students can contribute to the country, and learning Chinese is part of it. So I hope that I answered your question. Of course, it's on a very general term. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Mike, and I have 2 questions for you. The first is, do you think that China will get out of the middle income trap? And the second is that we all know that China's economy are made up of by the stock investment, and by digging the mines, I mean the coal and iron. Can you give me some instructions on how to develop the structure of the economy? Yes, thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much. I think those are the questions that I should delegate to our China team in IMF, because that's what they that's what they've been trying to figure out over the last few years about how China can avoid middle income trap, and what to do with the overinvestment. Because as I said earlier, the Chinese growth in the past was very much dependent on export and also on investment. There was lots of investment in infrastructure, and also in manufacturing sector, and obviously there will be overcapacity right now. So going forward, to be out of the trap, First, we don't know if it's in the trap or not. I mean, it's very much depends on how you define it. But it is very much about switch to a more sustainable growth, and not only depend on investment, but depend on productivity growth. That means make whatever investment more productive, not wasteful. And you move away from the investment in real estate market, housing market, probably into more technology. And I think that we are on the way getting there, but it's not going to be a very smooth path. So that's, I hope I answered your both questions. Well, I actually, you mean we can discuss on that. I think that's getting to very technical level, and I had to promise my daughter not to be boring, so I have to stick to that.
I was just curious to hear a little bit more about Anne's job, who your audience is, what you're translating. I was just curious. Thank you.
Sure. So China Digital Times is a nonprofit where we aggregate English language reporting on China. So we're like a one-stop shop where every day you can get the major China news. And the translations are focused on what's going on the internet in China. And so we have a lot of series around things, for instance, that people are posting on the social media platforms like Weibo, which is sort of like Twitter, and WeChat or Weixin, which is a mobile messaging app. And people are actually posting a lot of really interesting discussions of social and political issues on these platforms. So we do sort of a broad range of translations based on just interesting stuff getting posted online.
As a translator, do you think you have an advantage as an American person who speaks Chinese over someone who would be Chinese speaking English?
So it is the rare translator who can go from the original language to the target language where that target language is not their native language. And we do have some folks on staff who have done translations into English where it's not their native language. And even if your language is perfect, no grammatical errors, it's very hard to have that feel for the language. And we also do a range of translations. So if you're translating an official document, you're gonna have a very different tone than if you're translating stuff like just comments that people are posting online. So I would say, like, for the vast majority of translators, you're translating into your native language. But having said that, you also do have to have a very deep understanding of the language that you're working with, the original language. So I feel like I'm going to be a student of Chinese for the rest of my life because you have to know such a wide range about Chinese history, about very formal language, and these idioms from classical times. They're called chengyu. These will get used in more formal writing. And then on the other hand, you have to keep up with internet culture and memes in China. And then you have to figure out how to make that sound good to people in English and not just sound like sort of gibberish when it gets translated the other way around, because something that makes perfect sense in Chinese isn't going to make perfect sense in English and vice versa. So it's a constant learning process and a lot of playing with the two different languages.
All right, Mrs. Hernachowicz, right? I think so. Actually, I have learned English for 13 probably years like that, and I want to have a deep understanding of English, this language. This language is beautiful. Well, these days I found I have a hard time reading The Tale of Two Cities, which is an old book by Dickens, you know. So as a language expert, how do you overcome all these, difficulties, and how do you figure out not only modern literature, but also like ancient Chinese literature, can you give me some guidance, please? Thank you.
Sorry. So I have a few general points. And one of them, I especially learned this in graduate school, just as in your native language, you're not going to be an expert in everything. That you might be, for instance, very well read in modern literature in China, but like classical Chinese, Wen, it's not even very close to what people speak today. It takes a lot of specialized knowledge. So too, with the language that you're learning, it can be really helpful to focus on one or two areas that you're really passionate about. So if you're reading Dickens, for instance, and you feel you're really interested in like British literature of the 19th century, read a lot of it. But then, you know, you're going to go look at Shakespeare and it's going to be hard for you, and that's okay, because it's a different, it's still English, but it's still a different language, if that makes sense. So don't feel like you have to know everything about English, because not even a native speaker can do that, but it's really good to just, if you can, have that focus. And then some technical advice would be, if you have any kind of mobile app, or even just stuff on your computer that is like a word processor from Chinese to English, that can be really helpful. So there's actually one called Wenlin that was designed for Americans learning Chinese, but I use it, I've even read novels, just copy-pasted in there, because you can roll over the words to get the dictionary, and if there's a word, like, you know, I work with internet memes, stuff gets invented, it's not in the dictionary, I can actually add those words into the dictionary. So I guess kind of like focusing on one area, and then also finding tools, especially apps, mobile apps and software for your computer that can help you, are my two pieces of advice.
Hi, Mom. So, how long do you think the Chinese economy can sustain its high-speed development?
Thank you very much. This was unexpected. So for those who actually knows a little bit about economics, the economic growth comes from three parts. One is just more people working, and one is investment, and one is technology advances. So if you look at China, you look at the three components, you said, well, will there be more people working? Probably it's going to be difficult, because we have aging population, right? And if there be more investment, and we said that there's some sort of overcapacity already in the economy. So the investment has to be more selective, not just on the low return investment, but had to be the high efficient investment. And technology advance will become very important. China basically would have to become more like the US. You know, you need to advance on technology. So I hope that answers your question. And basically, you know, more engineers, more technology advance, and more innovation, and more creativity, creative ideas, and all this to improve so-called productivity. And that is the way to go, because you can't just rely on overinvestment. Did I answer your question? Okay.
Hi, Dr. Zhou. This is kind of a personal question, but how did you decide to come to the United States?
I hope this is the last question. Well, I came to the US in 1985, accidentally. I was a mathematician in China at that time. I was studying mathematics, and I was just going to graduate and continue to study applied physics. And then some professor from Princeton University went to China and met with the president and said, hey, you know, why don't I pick some students and go study economics in the US, so they can come back and help you formulate market-based economic policies. So I become, somehow accidentally, I become one of those 50 got picked. and to come and study in the US. But then, of course, what happened in China is that the Chinese economic reform took off, which is such a fast speed. It's much faster than my graduation. So when I graduated, I was basically rendered not that useful anymore. And the job up there, the Chinese economy already went further ahead. And so that's how I decided to work in an international organization and then just to have more global context in my career. But I've been always focused on China. But your question is about how I came here, so I think I answered more than I needed, actually. But thank you for the question.
That's it, sorry.
I know I disappointed Janet. She's a dear friend of mine, and then she helped me set up everything downstairs. Thank you, Janet, but we'll discuss more later, okay? Thank you for excellent questions and then terrific answers. Dr. Zhou, I can tell you, your presentation and answer are not boring at all. Thank you. On behalf of the Landon School, I want to thank Dr. Zhou and Ms. Hanakowitz for taking time to address us at today's program. I've learned a great deal from your insightful and informative presentation. Thank you. We prepare a token of appreciation and for each of the speakers. And thank you for coming out and giving an excellent presentation. Can you come up here? Every year, the China Roundtable takes place during Landon's Chinese Scholastic Exchange Program, which has 20 years of history. The exchange program has brought more than 370 intelligent and talented students and teachers from our partner schools in China to Landon and Holden Arms. Holden Arms is our sister school in Bethesda. It provides many interesting and fun experiences for American students curious about life in China. Thanks to all of our host families from both Landon and Holden communities, we have 19 visiting students and teachers with us today. And let's give a round of applause to welcome them to the United States. Welcome, guys. In the next few minutes, we will have an opportunity to enjoy a variety of cultural performances that they prepared for us. We will start with a poem recital by Wu Guanxiao Wu from Shanghai. The name of the poem is called 梦游天母吟留别, written by a famous poet Li Bai, who lived during the Tang Dynasty. Pu Shuangling Sunny from Chengdu will play a traditional Chinese instrument called guqin to accompany it. Let's welcome the performers.
《梦游天姥吟留别》李白。海客谈瀛洲，烟涛微茫信难求。越人于天姥，云霞明灭或可睹。天姥连天向天痕， 18五燕赤城，天台18000丈，对此欲倒东南倾。我欲因之梦无月，夜飞渡镜湖月。湖月照我影，送我至善溪。谢公宿处今尚在，入水荡漾清猿啼。脚着谢公屐，身登青云梯。半壁见海日，空中闻天鸡。千言万转路不定，迷花已时忽已明。熊咆龙吟饮烟泉，厉声灵犀惊尘颠。云轻轻兮欲雨，水淡淡兮生烟。列却霹雳，丘峦奔垂。洞天石飞，轰然中开。清明浩荡不见底，日月照耀金银台。你为衣兮风为马，云之君兮纷纷而来下。虎鼓瑟兮鸾回车，仙之人兮列如麻。忽魂悸已破洞，恍惊起而长嗟。惟觉时之枕席，是向来之烟霞。世间行乐亦如此，古来万事东流水。别君去兮何时还？且放白鹿青崖间。须行即骑访名山，安能摧眉折腰事权贵？使我不能开心颜。
Thank you for the unique performance. Wonderful. And I'm going to give credit to Romney sitting there and Henry in the music booth, and they put together a wonderful PowerPoint last night. So that's great teamwork. Next, Li Xingrui, Marjorie from Beijing, will present a piano solo for us. The first tune she will play is called Qingzang Gaoyuan. It describes the beauty of Qinghai, Tibetan plateau. The second tune she will play is called Liangzhu, the Butterfly Lovers. The Butterfly Lovers is a Chinese legend of a tragic love story of a pair of lovers, Liang Shanbo and Zhu Yingtai, whose names form the title of the story. The title is often abbreviated to Liangzhu. So let's welcome Li Xingrui. Hey, thank you for bringing us such a beautiful music. Next, Miss Li Hong, Kathy, an English teacher from Chengdu School, will perform a popular Chinese folk dance called 孔雀飞来, Chinese peacock dance. The peacock dance is one of the most widespread ancient dances of the Dai ethnic group in Yunnan province on the southwest border of China. In the Dai culture, the peacock is a symbol of good fortune, happiness, beauty, and honesty. Let's welcome our beautiful dancer. That was such a beautiful dance. Next, the last performance of the day is Tai Chi Quan by Wu Guanxiao, Liu Junsheng, Mike, and Li Jiaxi, Jane, and Peng Yuxin, Cindy, and Zhang Xinyu from Shanghai. Tai Chi is an ancient Chinese internal martial arts system which combines profound principles, theories, and martial art techniques. Tai Chi practice requires a deep level of concentration and a focused mind, allowing the mind to lead and guide the body's energy. Tai Chi is not only a form of martial art, but has also been widely acknowledged as an effective health exercise. And here's our Tai Chi performance. Let's welcome them.